Imagine spending 30 years in your room, completely cut off from the world. No job, no friends, no future. Now, imagine your only support is your 80-year-old parent, and they're running out of time. This is the reality for thousands of people in Japan today. They're part of a growing crisis involving individuals known as Hikikomori, and this crisis is bigger than you think. Hikikomori is a term from Japan describing individuals, often teenagers or young adults, who withdraw from society and remain isolated in their parents' homes or even their own homes for extended periods, sometimes lasting months or even years. These individuals avoid social interactions, do not attend school, and refrain from working. For this reason, they're also often referred to as NEETs, no education, employment, or training. While this term is primarily used to describe teens and young adults, what happens if a person isolates themselves for decades? There is a unique occurrence facing older adults as well, known as the 80-50 problem. These individuals, now in their 50s, never built careers, relationships, or financial independence. Their parents, now often in their 80s, have supported them their whole lives, but they won't be around forever. And when they're gone, what happens next? To understand how this happened, we have to go back to the 1990s. Japan's economic bubble burst. Stable jobs suddenly disappeared. A generation of young people found themselves stuck, unable to find work, many feeling like they had failed their families and were a failure amongst their peers. Some turned to part-time jobs. Others gave up entirely, retreating into their homes, ashamed and overwhelmed. Society moved on, but they were unable to do so themselves. Hikikomori are often presented in Japanese media, especially anime. A good example, and by good I mean one that doesn't mock hikikomori, is Welcome to the NHK, initially published as a manga in 2002. This series doesn't mock or sensationalize the protagonist and their feelings, and perfectly captures the emotions and struggles of these characters. Now, as far as real-life examples, plenty have been presented in articles and interviews all over the internet. For Hide, the problem started when he gave up school. I started to blame myself, and my parents also blamed me for not going to school. The pressures started to build up. Then, gradually, I became afraid to go out and fearful of meeting people. And then I couldn't get out of my house. Gradually, Hide relinquished all communication with friends and eventually his parents. To avoid seeing them, he slept through the day and sat up all night, watching TV. When Toyoaki Yamakawa's parents fell sick, he moved from Tokyo to his hometown Fukuoka to manage their care. As their only child, he felt a big burden to look after them, which also meant managing their financial affairs. Once I started living closer to my parents, I had a lot of problems, which became quite difficult for me to deal with on my own. Over time, he withdrew and remained in his home for 5 years, starting from age 35. The first stereotype that comes to mind is that it's only extremely introverted people who are not apt to social interactions that become hikikomori. Speaking from my own personal experience, I don't think that's entirely false. I think I am quite introverted, though in my mind, one reason why introverts are this way in Japanese society is because they hold back their thoughts due to fear of judgment or disturbing the harmony. So, what that last quote is referring to are the Japanese concepts of tatemae, your outward persona, and honne, your true inner feelings. In Japan, social harmony is a big deal. People generally try to avoid unnecessary conflict, keep things polite, and not say things that might hurt others, even if that means lying and telling someone what they want to hear. Like giving a compliment you don't totally believe, or agreeing with someone's beliefs just to keep the peace. It's not that honesty isn't valued, it is. Especially when it comes to big things like taking responsibility. In fact, admitting fault and sincerely apologizing is very much encouraged, primarily when it involves faults and mistakes that involve you. That being said, people are still people. Avoiding brutal honesty is a thing everywhere in the world. And there are situations in Japan where it's totally fine to be more casual and transparent, like meeting up with a close friend and stuff like that. Though when it comes to your workplace and social expectations, tatemae and honne are very much present. Many can find comfort in their personal space and enjoy their own company. There is nothing wrong with being introverted and not being that social butterfly type who can talk to anyone super easily. Everyone has their strengths and weaknesses. Now, the issue is when reclusive behavior becomes chronic. I know this very well. As difficult it is for myself to admit, I was once in a very similar place to those who have this kind of lifestyle. I have a chronic illness, a neurological disorder, and one day back in high school, it became unavoidable. I couldn't stand for more than a single minute without fainting. I quickly became tethered to my room and had no friends or social life because I had to finish school online. And as all my friends and peers entered college and later on got married, started families, found their own independence and lives, I was left behind, still in that same sad little room, spending my days playing video games, watching anime, reading fanfiction. My only time spent in the outside world was in doctors' offices and hospital beds. So, in short, I understand. I get it. I'm not in that situation anymore. However, this issue still persists for a large percentage of people in Japan. And my whole point here is that these are people who deserve to be humanized and understood. With that said, solutions have been discussed, as well as whether becoming a hikikomori is a combination of various psychiatric disorders or its own distinct culture-specific syndrome. While many cases can be linked to recognized health disorders such as anxiety, there is a significant number of individuals whose behavior doesn't fit neatly into existing psychiatric disorders. In trying to address this growing issue, which is essentially a crisis that came about from a previous crisis, some local governments have set up outreach programs to help hikikomori reintegrate. Nonprofits offer health support and job training. Now, the issue with the latter is how mental health has been heavily stigmatized for years, and accepting help is something many feel ashamed of doing. While help is out there, and while the people around the hikikomori do want to help, perhaps their way of addressing it is wrong. And what I mean by this is that perhaps people should be helping to empower rather than shame or ostracize. Because there comes a time during this isolation where you just don't feel like you count as a person. Helping to rebuild that lost confidence that makes someone feel this way in the first place is so important. The Hikikomori Syndrome and the 80-50 problem isn't just about Japan. It's about how society treats those who fall behind. It's about family, mental health, and what happens when an entire generation gets left behind. In Japan, customer service is legendary. Employees bow, go the literal extra mile, and always put the customer first. Not just using that as a figure of speech. The customer will often genuinely be placed as the top priority before the care and respect for the actual employee are even considered. But what happens when that culture is pushed a bit too far? When customers turn deliberately antagonistic, and workers suffer in silence. This is a recent occurrence in Japan, first being brought up around the early 2010s, an issue so prominent that laws have been put into place that make the act in itself illegal. It is called Kasuhara, or customer harassment. It refers to vulgar and demeaning behavior from customers towards employees, such as excessive complaints, verbal abuse, and/or unreasonable demands. Even getting physically aggressive. This has become a serious issue in Japan, especially in service industries where workers feel pressure to maintain a customer-first mentality, even in toxic situations. And when I say toxic, I truly mean it. Here are some examples. The guests arrive 30 minutes before check-in time at a traditional hot springs inn a couple of hours north of Tokyo. When they saw a sign asking that customers wait in their cars, they demanded to know why they could not get their room key early. The exchange, captured on a security camera, quickly exploded into angry shouting. Eventually, it ended on the pavement out front, with the inn's managing director down on his knees, bowing deeply and apologizing. I, as server, was delivering customers their food, which was finished late. This led to the customers shouting insults and even assaulting me for poor service. I was told the food was not good, and when I apologized, water was poured on me. In one instance, an assistant manager at a supermarket in Tokyo received a call from a shopper, claiming that the tofu he bought at the store had gone bad. When the employee visited the shopper's home to check, he found that the tofu, a product with a short shelf life, had been bought a fortnight earlier. Not wanting to alienate the shopper, the employee tried to remain diplomatic, but was then ordered by the customer to prostrate himself and apologize. Many of these same customers will go on to make up outrageous stories on social media, with the intention of slandering the company. These same people will even dox employees online. These instances have curated a vicious cycle between companies and their demanding customers, basically leading to expectations to continue going up and service workers being expected to continue meeting them. Basically, the customers are dissatisfied, the customers complain, providers offer better service to avoid social media shaming, the service levels increase across the industry and expectations rise, and the consumer, the ones who complain, their expectations rise even further. Eventually, consumer demands exceed capacity of service providers. You may be wondering who exactly would even do these things and go through the effort of harassing these poor employees. Well, a survey was done in 2020 asking victims of Kasuhara to identify the demographics of the tormentors. Unlike that typical Karen image those in Western society are so used to, most initiating Kasuhara were found to be men over the age of 50. But do take this survey with a grain of salt, as anyone could harass a customer service employee. I've worked retail. I've worked in a mall. I worked in a mall for about 3 years. And there are genuinely some mean-ass people out there. And people who disrespect or treat people in frontline service jobs poorly are not people I want to associate with. I mean, come on, why do you have to do that? Like, there's no reason for this kind of behavior. And if you thought that was bad, there is another subgenre of awful behavior called Matahara. And guess what that stands for? Maternity harassment. We got people out there harassing pregnant women too, especially in the workplace once they are expecting. This is a form of what's called pawahara, or power harassment. More on the issues that accompany this one a little later in the video. We're gonna go over the whole birth rate issue and why people aren't having children. Now, for a bit, it seemed like no end was in sight for these workers. But in 2017, UA Zensen, a trade union, published their findings regarding a survey given to service employees within their union. This is the same union that presented the findings regarding the demographics that we just discussed. It was found that 70% of the union's 50,000 members had been the victim of some form of Kasuhara. Fast forward to now, and company policies and city ordinances have been put into effect, with Tokyo applying a citywide ordinance in 2024, something that was a long time coming. We've already discussed societal issues with not integrating into society and working, but being securely employed can also result in negative societal occurrences. Imagine working so hard that it actually becomes life-threatening, that your body literally gives out. In Japan, there's a term for this, Karoshi, which literally means passing from overwork. So how did we even get here? Well, Karoshi first became a serious issue in Japan during the economic boom of the 1970s and 80s. Companies were expanding like crazy, and workers, well, they were expected to keep up. As Japan's economy boomed, so did the demands of its workers, leading to more cases of fatal overwork. The first reported case was in 1969 when a 29-year-old man in Japan's largest newspaper company passed away from a stroke. Notable cases observed include a 34-year-old man working up to 110 hours a week at an unnamed snack company. These conditions led to the man succumbing to a heart attack. Another includes a 22-year-old nurse who suffered a heart attack after working 34-hour shifts multiple times a month. These aren't just flat numbers in statistics. these were real people. Several elements contribute to Karoshi. There's long hours, as many employees work excessive hours, often without adequate rest. Sleep deprivation can be fatal. And then there's high stress. Pressure to meet ambitious company goals can lead to significant mental strain. The fear of losing one's job can also push individuals to overextend themselves. And yeah, this is not just Japan's problems. Countries like South Korea, China, and even Sweden have reported overwork-related fatalities. It is a worldwide issue. Overwork can occur anywhere, particularly that instance involving the nurse. Healthcare workers are extremely overworked. Though in general, Japan is known for its strict working environments, and all the strict expectations associated with that. Unity and collectivism are prioritized and adhered to. Many don't take vacations or national holidays off due to this mindset, and if you do, you're reminded of the burden you're putting on your coworkers as you attempt to relax. Here are some particularly insightful accounts regarding Japanese work culture that I found on r/Japanese. I worked for a time in lower-level jobs, think assembly line work. Overtime wasn't something that was optional. They would let you know around the 7th hour how much overtime you were working that day to meet the quota. Sometimes it was an hour, sometimes 3 hours extra. There would also be occasional mandatory Saturday work. Time off, even a sick day, is something that is frowned upon. They're also very strict about time. 10-minute break means you have to leave for the break when alerted to do so, but you are back at your station before the 10-minute sound rings. White collar's the same. It's not always as direct as didn't hit your quota, we need 3 more hours. But the idea is you leave after your boss does or tells you to. Basically, there's no such thing as overtime after a while. It's just extended working hours. Even as a teacher and manager, I was expected to stay longer to finish reports and scheduling, making a 10-hour workday up to a 12-hour one on most days. It sucks, and it's toxic in a lot of cases, because if you get sick or exhausted, you get on the boss's bad side. Obviously, there's exceptions to the rule, and not every workplace is bad, but the level of dedication expected is just completely different. I mean, they made up the word karoshi to explain death due to exhaustion from overworking. It's a work design that is flawed, unhealthy, and quite frankly, ineffective in the long run. And this isn't even touching the Nomikai and forced social interactions that come with the job as well. I love Japan, but their work culture is not one of the things I love about it. Honestly, when you take all that into consideration, it's no wonder there are so many hikikomoris. There are an abundance of stories similar to this online. If you have any of your own that you would like to discuss or just get off your chest, please feel free to use the comment section to do so. By the way, Nomikai is basically drink culture with coworkers. Sometimes, even after all that overtime, an employee will be invited to go drinking with the boss and other employees. It's not wise to decline these offers. Think of it as a drunken team-building exercise, one that can lead to gender inequality and binge drinking. Yay. You're not really expected to chat during work hours, you're expected to get work done. So loosening up with your work superiors is essential if you ever want to be promoted. Not attending these nomication meetups can often lead to you being ostracized from your peers. So yeah, lots of pressure and lots of expectations. So how does quitting these jobs work? I often think back to this particular YouTube short. I saw it by chance a couple of months back. It details the grueling and even somewhat humiliating process of quitting your job in Japan. It'll be linked below if you want to check out the whole thing. Now, while it's true that most employers will want you to be with them long term, I mean, that's often why you get that "where do you see yourself in 5 years" question in job interviews. A job you obtain in Japan, especially after college, is often seen as a lifelong career, and for that reason, there's often a lot of pressure on those in those positions. Of course, you aren't forced to stay in a job, and you can leave, but it's a trying process, to the point that some will hire companies to terminate employment for them. And you may be wondering, surely people get fired from jobs there, right? And yes, of course, but there is a fate worse than that. This brings us to expulsion rooms. This practice was recently brought to light in the gaming world. I recently watched a video by Arlo, a creator who covers various gaming stories, that discussed game developer Bandai's potential use of this following some game cancellations. There's a whole article on it as well. So, say you're employed at a company in Japan and things aren't going so well. You're not able to meet all the demands of this job, no matter how hard you're trying. And the company is not pleased. Instead of being let go, you will be sent to the oidashibeya, or expulsion room. These rooms are utilized to push out employees the company doesn't want anymore. Firing someone outright isn't always easy, and it can be costly on the employer's end. So instead, companies move these workers to boring, meaningless, and even humiliating roles. Like having a former manager do nothing but sit in a room and scan documents all day. The idea? Make the job so unbearable that the person quits on their own accord. Some see it as a smart workaround, while others think it's a very harsh way of forcing people out. Either way, it shows the struggle between Japan's traditional job security and the realities of modern business. While this would seem like a nice break for some, remember the mindset of somebody who works extremely hard, who wants to truly do their best. These rooms often have a big window facing the other workers, the employees that are still favored by the company. They see you sitting in a room all day, doing nothing, and it's humiliating, dehumanizing even, after working so hard and literally giving your life to this employer. So, Karoshi and everything else that we've touched on here serves as a sobering reminder of the importance of balancing work demands with personal health. It underscores the need for systemic changes to ensure that dedication to one's job doesn't come at the ultimate price. Now, there have been attempts to try and remedy this. Lawmakers in Japan have proposed a 4-day work week, but only time will tell if it will truly heal and become better in the future. This one is better understood after understanding hikikomori and general work culture in Japan. Now, this one is also a doozy, so don't expect a full comprehensive explanation on the root of this issue. That would take hours. Now, I can, however, provide a crash course. Japan is facing a big challenge with its shrinking population. Back in 2023, the country recorded only about 727,000 births, which is the lowest ever and a 5.6% drop from the previous year. At the same time, marriages are also declining. Only 474,000 couples tied the knot in 2023, compared to 504,000 in 2022. What about 2024? Well, while we don't have the hard numbers just yet, Japan's birth rate in 2024 is projected to hit another record low, with the number of births very likely to fall below 700,000 for the first time. The marriage rate is also anticipated to remain low. So what does this mean? Well, with fewer babies being born and more elderly people, Japan's population is not just shrinking, but also aging at an alarming rate. This puts pressure on the economy and social systems because fewer workers are available to support the growing number of retirees. And, we already talked about how rough it already is for those in the workforce. The government is trying to fix the issue. Keyword here is trying, by boosting wages and supporting families. The goal here is to have people feeling more financially stable enough to have kids. As many couples in Japan say the biggest reason why they cannot have children is because they simply cannot afford them. But here's the thing, having children costs a lot of money. And many people agree that what Japan as a country is trying to do to help these couples have children is simply not enough. And reversing this trend is not going to be easy. Japan still has a long way to go in tracking its population crisis before it's potentially irreversible. So why is this problem not being fixed? Well, that's a very loaded question that I just gave myself. But here's what I find to be a good short answer, then we'll break it down in greater detail. Because the incentives to have kids are still weaker than the reasons not to. I'll give you $5 to buy a new car from me at full sticker price. Nah. There's also the fact of a lingering grind culture when it comes to education and labor. People spending excessive hours at the office or in studies, burning themselves out to the point that they are too tired to even think about finding a partner, much less maintaining one. Japanese jobs. Expects you to be there basically all your waking hours 6 days a week. Japanese government.
Why are people not having kids?
Well, unless you're a Japanese woman, and then no matter how much you love your career, and no matter how hard you busted your ass through school to get the career, as soon as you get pregnant, you're expected to leave the company. Some of my Japanese students have even told me of situations where pregnant women didn't want to leave just yet. So one day, when they showed up for work, they find that their desk was just gone. That strategy is also sometimes used to give the hint to people in their 50s who the company doesn't want to keep employing, but won't directly fire. Second problem, you can read a lot about what the Japanese call the herbivore man. Basically, men who are so terrified of any remote possibility of rejection that they are unwilling to make any effort to approach a lady unless they're 900% sure she's gonna say yes. Young adults in Japan, especially those in their 20s, are earning between $17,000 to $20,000 a year, and those wages haven't budged in a decade. And childcare expenses are eating up nearly half of a couple's combined income. So, that's a lot of money. So, for a lot of young people in Japan, starting a family just isn't financially realistic. It's just not doable. Heck, many people can't even date or find a partner due to being so busy in the first place. Japan also has an ongoing loneliness epidemic, fueled by overwork and people managing their loneliness with various media alternatives. So let's talk about work culture again. Japan has made progress getting more women into the workforce, but here's the catch. Over half of them, according to studies, are stuck in lower-paid, unstable jobs with no benefits or job security. On top of that, traditional gender roles and crazy work hours make raising a family even harder. Say you're able to find a partner. You marry and are able to obtain that financial security necessary to start your family, a family you really want. Well, becoming pregnant, despite all the time and energy you put into your job, all that overtime, all those after-work izakaya meetups, despite being initially favored by your superiors due to all that hard work, well, getting pregnant may be all it takes to no longer be favored at all. This would make you a victim of Matahara. Matahara refers to maternity harassment, where women face discrimination at work because of pregnancy or childbirth. This can involve being pushed out of jobs or treated unfairly. In Japan, many women go through this, and it's a big issue that affects not just the women directly, but also discourages other women from having children. It's tied to outdated gender norms and long working hours. While women were expected to quit work once they had children, in this day and age, many women do not wish to do so due to financial and societal difficulties, or just, wanting to retain their job and everything they worked for. Roughly 60% of women in Japan still decide to quit work and become housewives nonetheless. Every woman has the potential to become pregnant. When women in the workplace see what other women have endured in the form of Matahara, they also become infected with Matahara and quietly leave that company, fearing that they could become the victim of such harassment in the future. Many of the women who contact Matahara Net say, "I felt like pregnancy was a bad thing. If I knew this was going to happen, I would have never gotten pregnant. And I thought that I never wanted to get pregnant again." Seeing this happening to other women within the same workplace undoubtedly leads to women rethinking marriage and pregnancy. In other words, Matahara cannot be contained as the harassment of one woman, but rather spreads out as harassment towards all women. You're causing a lot of trouble. You're so lucky you can take time off. You're selfish. These are the words often used by colleagues having to cover work normally done by women taking time off for pregnancy or child-rearing. These colleagues feel it is unjust that they have to take on extra work because someone made their own decision to get pregnant, and they instill Matahara on the other person because of this. Even when women want to start families and have the financial ability to do so, they have the space and all of that, they begin to be intimidated by their employer and thus may never actually do so. Oh, also, I just thought I'd throw this out here as a woman. This is kind of wild. Epidurals, pain relief from the experience of actually pushing out a human being, they're not commonplace in Japan, and most births are natural. Many don't have kids because of how painful and scary birth is. So, just throwing that out there too. Now, not everyone in Japan has these experiences. Just as many have understanding employers and a healthy work-life balance, many are able to continue working peacefully and are not treated differently due to becoming parents. Like I said, 60% of women face this, but that's not all women in Japan. So, what's Japan as a country doing about these birth rate shenanigans? Well, in my opinion, the here's $5 for buying a brand new car is a great analogy. While the government is offering financial aid programs and stimulus payments to new parents, they don't really provide a lot of financial assistance. A push to reform workplaces has been in the works as well, including a push for higher wages and a 4-day work week. We've already kind of touched on that. We'll see how that goes in time though, but like I said, many feel that not enough is being done. Many, but not everyone. There are some cities in Japan going the extra mile. One notable example is Akashi, a city in Hyogo Prefecture. Akashi provides free childcare centers, preschools, and kindergartens, and free school lunches until age 15. They also provide free diapers delivered to the home of the parents for the first year of the child's life, and get this, free medical care up to age 18. So, many people looking to have families are actually moving to Akashi to receive this support. So it's absolutely helping, it's absolutely making some kind of a difference. But remember, this is just one city in Japan and not among Japan's largest cities. If cities like Tokyo, Osaka, or Nagoya offered such programs, it would be a tremendous help. But the question is, can these big cities afford to do so? Some also feel the media is attempting to persuade people to have kids. McDonald's Japan aired a short ad showing a young family eating McDonald's. Seems innocent enough, right? Well, a number of people didn't seem to think so. Birth rates continue to drop, and the population continues to age. And the efforts made to remedy this lead many doubting that a change will come soon. While the stuff we've talked about so far kind of goes hand in hand, this one is taking things into another gear. Paris syndrome is something that specifically affects people from Japan who visit Paris, France for the first time. Paris, despite the romantic, fashionable, clean, and overall ideal image many may have of the city, is actually not like that at all. It's a city full of unsavory areas, like any city, and is known to have a lot of scams and deceptions around its more famous landmarks. While a bit of culture shock is typical for those experiencing a new country and culture altogether, many Japanese tourists are rendered especially dismayed, to the point that the Japanese embassy put a hotline in place to help Japanese tourists in Paris who were in a state of shock or distress during their travels. The term Paris syndrome was pioneered by Hiroaki Ota, a psychiatrist working in France during the 1980s. It is defined as an extreme and severe form of culture shock. How severe? Well, here is a quote defining some of the symptoms. The syndrome is characterized by symptoms such as acute delusional states, hallucinations, feelings of persecution, perceptions of being a victim of prejudice, aggression, or hostility from others, derealization, depersonalization, anxiety, as well as psychosomatic manifestations such as dizziness, tachycardia, sweating most notably, but also others, such as vomiting. The prejudice element is a distressing issue in itself and has been brought forward by Japanese celebrities in the past, including Gakt and Emiko Kaminuma. But how many, aside from these public figures, experience Paris syndrome? On average, up to 12 Japanese tourists a year fall victim to it, mainly women in their 30s with high expectations of what may be their first trip abroad. So, despite how distressing this experience is for those involved, it's not a growing epidemic or anything. And I know what the title of this video says, and yeah, it's not a problem that needs direct attention to fix. And I mean, there is that hotline. And extreme forms of culture shock is something that occurs around the world. It's believed that the idealized image of Paris in Japanese pop culture, combined with language barriers and cultural differences, contributes to this. Similar occurrences happen when foreign tourists visit Jerusalem, Italy, or New York City. Also, Paris is a big city, and big cities come with the complexities and dangers of any big city. Speaking of big cities, there's another thing like this for Tokyo. It's known as Tokyo shock. It's used to describe the feeling of sensory overload when you visit Tokyo for the first time. And it can affect foreign visitors as well as Japanese people who came from small towns and rural areas. Tokyo is not a city I personally felt unsafe in. I've been to LA, Vegas, San Francisco, Seattle, Kuala Lumpur. But To describe Tokyo as overwhelming is absolutely an understatement. And navigating Tokyo Station for the first time is an experience I never want to relive. So yeah, I'm pretty sure I've experienced Tokyo shock myself. Now, I don't have the hard numbers, but I'm sure Paris syndrome is a little less common today due to the internet and the videos you can see and expose yourself to. I've read some claims that the hotline is no longer in place, but I'm not 100% with that information. Either way, Paris syndrome is a fascinating cultural observation. Imagine feeling so trapped by debt, shame, or personal failure that your only way out is to completely reset and start over your life. Johatsu, which literally means evaporation in Japanese, refers to people in Japan who intentionally disappear without a trace, often to escape debt, toxic relationships, societal pressure, or personal failure. It's a phenomenon that's been happening for decades, and it's rarely talked about openly. Unlike cases of missing persons due to crime or accidents, Johatsu are individuals who choose to vanish. One big reason behind this is Japan's deep-rooted cultural expectations, where failure, whether financial, professional, or personal, can bring shame, not just to the individual but to the entire family. Rather than face judgment or legal troubles, some people decide the best solution is to simply disappear and start fresh somewhere else. What's surprising is that there are businesses dedicated to making this happen. Night-moving companies that specialize in helping people disappear, offering everything from last-minute moving services to setting them up in a completely new location. They operate legally, and because of Japan's strict privacy laws, it is incredibly difficult for anyone, including family members, to track someone down unless they want to be found. This can lead to friends and family members fearing the worst and fearing for that person's safety. Now, despite these concerns, as long as this person is a legal adult, their choice to start over in secret isn't illegal in itself. Authorities don't usually investigate Johatsu cases unless there's evidence of a crime. Even when families desperately search for their loved ones, those strict privacy laws really do make it difficult to track them down if they don't want to be found. All that aside, there are private investigators willing to take on these types of cases. While they cannot tell the person to return to their family and old life, they can potentially give the family some kind of closure. The Johatsu phenomenon isn't new. It's been happening for decades, and the term first started being coined in the 1960s. Though back then it was more commonly used for husbands who disappeared without a trace trying to escape their unhappy marriages. Johatsu is rarely something that's talked about openly, at least like in day-to-day life. Some people disappear to escape life's pressure, but others just want a fresh start. Some fear for their safety and choose to evaporate due to having a stalker or escaping a cult. While some find new lives, others struggle in their isolation, caught between freedom and loneliness. But where do the Johatsu go? Do they escape to the countryside? Live a life on the run, constantly moving to ensure their past never catches up? Actually, many Johatsu escape to urban areas like Tokyo or Osaka, where they can easily disappear into the crowd. They often find work in cash-based jobs like construction, cleaning, or working in small izakayas. Some of these jobs don't require an ID, making it easier to stay off the grid. In addition, there are specific neighborhoods known to house Johatsu and those without IDs. One example is Kamagasaki, Osaka's Lost District. This area, also known as Airin-chiku, has been a refuge for those trying to disappear. It's home to a large population of day laborers, many of whom don't use their real names. There are also groups and unofficial networks that will help someone who wishes to escape and start over as a Johatsu, providing shelter and assistance in starting over. If you're interested in learning more about Johatsu in particular, there are some fantastic documentaries online, and even a book that really gets into the details and cultural landscape that makes these occurrences so common. Let's end the video on a positive note, shall we? Not every societal syndrome is a negative one after all. One of the coolest things about Japan is its innovations in technology. The name Galapagos Syndrome comes from the Galapagos Islands, where Charles Darwin found species that had evolved uniquely because they were cut off from the mainland. In the same way, Japanese technology and mobile phones developed in their own little bubble. becoming super advanced but also incompatible with global standards, because everyone was so far behind. Mobile phones are probably the best known example. They're crazy, and they did some really cool things that most phones anywhere else in the world could not. They had high-quality cameras, mobile payments, internet browsing, and even TV streaming, all before the iPhone even existed. But here's the problem. They were designed only for Japan. Instead of using global systems like GSM or LTE, they had their own systems, which made it hard for them to compete internationally. Japanese appliances are also kind of wacky and cool like this too. Like 10 or 15-ish years ago, back when I had yet to spend time in Japan, I would spend a lot of my time watching a series called Begin Japanology. Most of the episodes were up on YouTube. They probably still are. And each one is a deep dive on a very specific element of Japan and its culture. I remember an episode on home appliances, of all things, and it was unexpectedly magical. The capabilities of these things were insane. One I particularly remember was a rice cooker and bread maker hybrid by Panasonic. This thing could make loaves of bread out of rice? I was enamored with this thing. I even went online to try and find it and import it to America. Anyways, the same thing has happened in other industries as well, like automobiles, banking, and even gaming. So yeah, Japan sometimes resists global trends in favor of homegrown systems. Now, Galapagos Syndrome is also used to refer to Japan's business practices being a bit different and often perceived as being behind on the times. Or just in general, not meeting the global standard. A good example I can think of is Nintendo. They have truly expanded in their own unique and spectacular direction. But their business practices are very much the practices of a traditional Japanese company. And they often do things that confuse, baffle, and even frustrate the non-Japanese consumer. Innovation is great, but if you don't think globally, you risk being left behind. This kinda did end up happening with all those crazy and unique flip phones. Galapagos Syndrome has led to a lot of really cool stuff though, like DDR machines and calculators that test your compatibility with other people, and Tamagotchi. I'm working on a video on Japanese 90s and Y2K era tech, so I got that on the brain right now. But in conclusion, Galapagos Syndrome is a very Japanese occurrence, but also a particularly neat one. Congratulations, you made it to the end of the video. Make yourself at home. So quick little announcement, I am actually going to be streaming in about a week. Next weekend I'm going to be streaming Yakuza 0, and I'm going to be making streaming a regular thing, at the very least once every 2 weeks. So my schedule is basically, well, what I'm trying to make it is upload one weekend, stream the next, rinse and repeat. So just kind of alternate between streaming and uploading. So if you like Yakuza 0, if you just want to hang out, look forward to it. I'd be happy to see you there. This video is probably the most research heavy I have ever done in the history of my time on the YouTubes. Genuinely felt like I was writing a thesis or ethnography and I was back at university. Yeah. I hope you guys enjoyed it and maybe possibly learned something. Huge thank you to Based Finger, just the letter A, Lost Library Book, Andrew Fitzgerald, Onyx X, SCM64 Entertainment, Zan, Sparkly B, Taurian Gales, or Taurian Gales, I'm Just a Cop, Pocky, Monty Pla, Misato Sumemasa, Jelly Rolling, Brahman, Mugen, Garo Riffert, Juno Zanelli Maxwell, Rex Drinks Red Bull, Rachel, Vanessa, Raglan Strom, Black Taco 695, Rain Summer, Kyle Hockenberry, Solid Ellipsis, Spencer Lynn, Nomber, Josh Spears, Lauren Hoagland, Gio Woe, Aiden Sexton, J-Man, David Lawrence, Erlyn Kniflot, Gabriel, Connor McLaughlin, Jordan May, Shelfie, Stephen Bride, Creepy Leanie, Bill Baker, Gina Britton, Luke Brown, Pigpen, Layla Bloom, Lizard Queen 27, Newt Newt Fruit Shoot, Hexmaniac Hana, Chitoge, Jeremiah BLR, 322-32232, Rora Morasso, Pada, Meek, Sidnep, Hosea DeRoca, Akali, Red Hoodie 50, Iggs, Eels, C Chameleon, Digital Dubs, Shivam Vashi, Pan Fried Life Jacket Awareness, Stadio VGM, Nature J. Reese, Argoa Bill, Christopher Valencia, PP Pascatag, Andrew LaPena, Mads House, Airfire, Grand Tactician, Sokol, and the Shonen Knife. Thank you so much, everyone, and I will see you in the next video or the next stream. Alright, see you guys later.